what we don't want is those tin ewes burning off small bits of condition that they don't have, and want her to keep as much as we can. So a simple thing, like if you have a twin bear ewe and she's tin, put her in with the triplets. That extra little bit of feeding, as I said, it won't build condition, but it will make sure that she maintains what condition she has. Same if there's a single bear ewe she's tin, put her in with the twins. Small change like that will just help her, keep whatever condition she has.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode, we bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. As the lambing season approaches, we're joined by Dr. Frank Campion to discuss key aspects of managing ewe condition at this critical stage of the production cycle. Frank begins by analysing the latest scan results from the better farms and compares them to previous seasons. We also examine the challenges posed by lower feed value silage this year and the implications that will have for feeding plans. Frank highlights the significant impact the body condition score can have on lamb survival, lamb growth rates, as well as flock culling decisions. We also explore practical short-term strategies to mitigate some of these effects. We particularly focus on the heightened vulnerability of our younger ewes in them scenarios. We hear now from Frank.
All the flocks have scanned at this stage. As with other years within the Better Farm programme, we have flocks that are new to the programme, we have flocks that have been in the programme a number of years, and I suppose those flocks have been in the programme a number of years, been following a consistent breeding policy and doing different management aspects to try and bring up their scans and maintain them at a high level. So we've a range in the flocks. But I'd say by and large, they're back a small bit on average. But it's a relatively small bit. We're talking about between 0.05 and 0.1 of a litter size on average. So no big disaster, but the trend will be slightly back on other years. I suppose the caveat with that is when we've looked at this with flocks over the years, comparing litter size between 1 year and the next can often be kind of a dangerous game, and you need to look at over a 4 or 5 year period, particularly where there's changes in genetics going on in the flock, or you might be expanding and there might be changes in age structure in terms of a lot of younger ewes, or maybe there's a lot of older ewes in the flock because you haven't been putting in enough replacements. Those sort of things can change from year to year, but if you look at over a 5 year period, it gives you a much better idea of the trend and where you're heading or where your actual litter size is sitting.
Frank, overall pregnancy rates reasonably good, I'm assuming, across the board on them farms?
Yeah, pregnancy rates are good, and when we look across the board on those farms, for most of the flocks, the pregnancy rate is actually up a couple of percent on where it would have been this time last year, which is good in itself.
Just a bit more singles, a few less multiples, really is the trend.
Yeah, exactly. A couple more singles, a couple of less triplets, probably less quads in it this year than we would have seen other years. Nothing drastic, because we're not seeing a drastic change in overall litter size, but a small change in that. And that's, I suppose, what's given us a very good pregnancy rate, but a slightly lower litter size. But like I said, it's relatively small.
I suppose, look, like every flock at the moment, the focus the next couple of weeks is heading into lambing. One of the other key things we talk about now is nutrition. You have the silages tested on them farms, and we could probably discuss this a couple of weeks back, but overall, what do they look like this year, and is there anything to be concerned about?
Yeah, so I think, to be fair, the silage samples this year are back in quality on previous years. So, when we've looked at this across the farms, on average, across dry matter, protein, energy, DMD, all those main, I suppose, those key variables of quality that we look at, they're all back on average for the group. And where we see the big drop, I suppose, when we look at the ranges, take the likes of our DMD, we have, some of the silages tested just at 62 DMD, and none of our silages tested above 75 DMD, whereas usually we would have seen, a couple of silages across the farms coming in at 77, 78 DMD, and we would have seen very few silages less than 65, 66 DMD. So, the silage quality is back in other years, and there's a number of reasons for that, I suppose. When you look back to last spring and last summer, for a lot of flocks, they never saw that big burst of grass growth, which used to allow them to drop out paddocks and make kind of very high quality silage of excess paddocks. So they were relying more on, I suppose, your traditional silage cuts to fulfill the silage they needed, and they weren't able to get some of them very high quality cuts, and we're seeing that now at this stage. So look, that's what it is. The ship has sailed, but I suppose what we've done now is the feeding plans have been modified to suit that. So as we've talked about, and I'm sure you've had other people talking about, as your silage GMD goes up, the less concentrates you need to feed in late pregnancy. So with those lower quality silages, we just need to supplement it with some extra concentrates to make sure those requirements are being met.
Look, we look back at it in many cases with best intentions in the world, weather went again, farms actually, this is right across the board. That delay of a week, that delay of 10 days, 2 weeks in some cases, that's the knock-on consequence of it. And maybe, Frank, one of the key things out of that is, yes, we have to up them out, but we also probably have to start feeding a little bit earlier in some cases, particularly with the triplets.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, generally as their silage quality goes up, you feed less, but it's, as you said there, you start later too. So if we're on poor quality silage, we're starting to feed concentrates a little bit earlier. And I know, for some cases, it's only a case going in a week or two earlier, and it can sound relatively small. But at that late pregnancy stage, that can have a huge knock-on effect in the performance of the flock in terms of if we're not getting in and meeting the ewes requirements in these kind of last 8 weeks before she lambs, we'll just start burning condition off the ewe. And if she doesn't have condition to burn off, her performance will suffer. And if we're burning off that, ideally we want to leave that condition on her so that she has it for the first few weeks after she lambs when she'll put it back into milk for the lambs. So, it's a case that we probably need to be slightly ahead of ourselves with our feeding this year if we've lower quality silage. But the first thing to all that, Kieran, is you have to test the silage and see what you have. So for every bad batch of silage in a flock, there's a better quality batch. And the thing is, you have to see what the different batches are testing at and then match it to the budget. So you could have 80 DMD silage there, but if you've only 5 bales and you need 100 bales, there's no point doing a feeding plan around that. So you need to match the budget and the silage sample analysis to it and then build your feeding plan.
No, and I think, look, it's an important point. Still something that could be done on farms, definitely. And one thing I suppose I would say is they are representative of what's out there. So maybe it's a message to producers to test it and be sure you're on the right track and have a feeding plan there for it. Look, you mentioned about condition score. It's something you discussed in a lot more detail at the sheep conference. Whereas the voters can pass condition score effects on scanning. In terms, Frank, of that impact of condition score, particularly from mid-pregnancy right the way through now at lambing, at lamb performance post-lambing, what were maybe just a couple of key things that stood out on the impact that can have?
Yeah, so look, I suppose to give the background of this, Kieran, when we talk about condition score, and we say from mid-pregnancy, the mid-pregnancy condition score, what we're measuring there is basically what reserves that Joe has. And once she lambs, her energy and protein requirements actually shoot up higher than what they are even in pregnancy. And as she goes from that change from lambing into lactation, she just physically can't take in enough feed to meet her requirements. And if she has the body reserves there, what she'll do is she'll mobilize them. They'll help make up the deficit in energy and protein requirements, which will help her reach her peak milk yield or, her high peak milk yield. And that'll, ultimately drive on the performance of the lambs. If she doesn't have that reserve, her peak milk yield will be lower. She won't have the same amount of milk for the lambs and your lamb performance will suffer. So I suppose when we've looked at this in the better farms and looking at that kind of mid-pregnancy condition score and how it links into the performance, what we've basically seen is, those ewes that we would describe as fit at mid-pregnancy. So they're somewhere between body condition score 3 and body condition score 4. So they're kind of half condition score either side of our mating target of 3.5. And generally those ewes, their lambs perform better. They're less likely to be lost from between lambing and weaning. And also what you end up seeing is that those ewes that are in good or fit body score at mid-pregnancy, they're less likely to be culled out of flock before the following year. So that the consequence of that then is if a ewe is thin, it's not that you're guaranteed that she's going to lose a lamb or be culled, it's that she's more likely to lose one of her lambs or more likely to be culled out of flock. And ultimately out of that too as well, her litter will perform worse. So they won't be as heavy at 7 weeks, won't be as heavy at 14 weeks. I suppose it leads on to then the consequence that you have a slower drafting pattern. You have lighter lambs at weaning, which are going to take more feed to get them up to that drafting weight. And even if we don't mind maybe keeping lambs a bit later, given the way prices have gone the last couple of years, if they're lighter at weaning, they're still going to take extra feed and extra resources to get them up to that weight. Whereas if we have the ewes in the right condition score, they're milking up to their potential, and we have a heavier weaning weight, it makes that management for the rest of the year much easier.
True, and look at there's less of them. I suppose the one aspect of that you can't capture, but something everybody will acknowledge: thin ewes are no fun at lambing. They're no fun in managing post lambing, poor milk, and that. There's a lot more intervention. I know something you weren't able to maybe capture fully in that, but it's one of the other consequences of very thin ewes at that point.
Oh, look what it is, and like I said, what we saw with this was that the thin ewes were more likely to be culled. So that's not to say that just because she was fit means she definitely wouldn't be culled, or just because she's thin she definitely be culled, but they were more likely to be culled. And they were culled for a variety of reasons, be it mastitis, they were empty, they didn't rear their lambs, etc. You name the reasons, they were probably included in there. But as a consequence of that, then they were the ones that had more labour going into them in that really busy period in lambing and just after lambing, be it in terms of medical intervention or be it in terms of having to bring lambs back in, etc. And the more of them you have and the more labour that goes into them, what we tend to see with the better farms anyway is it takes your time, but also your attention away from the rest of the flock. And that can suffer as a result then because you just don't have the time or the resources to keep everything ticking along. And I think we've talked about this before, Kieran, in terms of, stuff like restricting the lambing spread, so pulling the ram after 4 or 5 weeks. Once you get the bulk of them lambed and get them out, you need to be giving your full attention to them. Something as simple as not moving the ewes, delaying it by a day or a day and a half can have a big knock-on effect in your 7 week weights, because at that stage of the year, your growth rate is so dependent on milk production, and the ewes has such a heavy requirement, and then you see those effects right through the rest of the year. So it's the same with these tin ewes. They pull your eye away from the ones that from the rest of the flock as well. So it has a huge knock-on effect.
So look, it's all the little things all add up over time. Look, Frank, in some ways we are where we are. You said at the beginning, we're not going to be able to build condition. So for Marshall and Frockney, we're kind of heading into that final phase. We're not going to be able to build condition in reality unless something drastically changes. What are the couple of things that we can actually do with our ewes from now until the point of lambing?
Yeah, so look, at you're right, you're not going to build it at this stage. Anything the ewe consumes at this stage, really, she partitions back into the lambs. Okay, and that's why I suppose we're so careful about our feeding in ways so that we don't end up with producing too big a lamb. Because if we just overfeed the ewe now, all we do is grow the lamb. But what we can do is a simple thing just to make sure that she maintains her condition. So what we don't want is those tin ewes, burning off small bits of condition that they don't have, and want her to keep as much as we can. So a simple thing, like if you have a twin bearing ewe and she's tin, put her in with the triplets. That extra little bit of feeding, as I said, it won't build condition, but it will make sure that she maintains what condition she has. Same if there's a single bearing ewe, she's tin, put her in with the twins. Small change like that will just help her, keep whatever condition she has. And then when we get to lambing, the ewes will be in the individual pen, or you'll have caught them for whatever reason. It's very easy to put our hand on them. So you're feeling between the last rib and the hip bone, feeling along that spine and transverse process there. And if the ewe is thin, it's probably no harm on most farms that we'd have a small group running away from the main batch, and they're getting fed a bit of concentrates, and the lambs might be getting offered a bit of concentrates just to take the pressure off the ewe and give the lambs every chance. And it just, it helps them thinner ewes along the way. It makes sure that those lambs get a slightly higher level of performance. And we've seen this maybe with the better farms in previous years. One flocks we said from yourself worked with Kieran, where there was a high level of tin ewes at mid-pregnancy. Where the decision was made to run a big group of ewes and lambs being fed concentrates after lambing, which wouldn't be the normal practice on the flock and not something we'd recommend normally. But what it helped do was it helped get that lamb performance up, help stop those ewes losing any more excessive condition, and break out this negative cycle of body condition score. Because what we tend to see on flocks, particularly where there's high level of tin ewes, where maybe half the ewes or less than that kind of body condition score 3 at mid-pregnancy, is that because it has such a knock-on effect in terms of extra mortality, extra culling, but also lower lamb performance, you end up with a lot of extra lambs knocking around the farm and a lot of ewes that aren't hitting their condition score targets the following year. You've put your grass, because you have the extra lambs around, you're not able to put extra grass and time into the ewes. You get around to the mating time next year, the ewes are still under conditioned, and you'll go back into the same cycle again. So, something like, pulling out the tin ewes now, getting them fed after lambing, you break that cycle and you try and get your condition score right again the following year. And it takes a couple of years to get it back up to where you need it to be, but it just puts a break in the cycle.
Frank, just on that one, and that is something that might need to be adopted on certain farms. And again, it's farm specific. It depends on what you have, but it is one option. Just in terms of that impact, does it affect ewes evenly? Like I would have assumed previous to this that the younger ewes in the flock are probably more adversely affected than some of the older ewes that seem to get on and manage. Of course, milk yield and things is higher, so we probably see less of the effects with them.
Yeah. Oh, definitely, yeah. And you've touched on two things there that we saw jumping out looking at the Better Farm data from last year in particular, is that, first of all, it is farm specific. So, each flock will be slightly different. If you're a flock with a small number of tin ewes, it's an easy problem to solve. You can run a small little group there of ewes after lambing. There might be only 3 or 4% of the flock in it. If you have a flock where half the ewes are tin at mid-pregnancy, well, then you'll have to take the more drastic action like we just discussed. But the other thing that jumped out was the age effect. So as we went from hoggets up into the mature ewes, basically, the young ewes were more affected by being tin than the older ewes. And you're right, that's certain things. Like we know that as a ewe gets older, up to a certain point, her milk yield increases, and then it starts to drop off again. So even if she's tin, she's still able to produce that extra bit of milk. So your younger ewes, it's really important that they're the right weight, the right condition when they're going to the ram. Because if they're under conditioned or underweight, what you do see is a bigger effect. So you see a bigger decrease in the lamb performance, and you see an increase in your likelihood that those ewes will lose a lamb, or that those ewes won't make it back to the following mate.
Frank, look, I think a couple of very useful tips on what we can do over the next couple of weeks. Again, there's a longer term strategy here in terms of managing condition and avoiding getting into this situation, but short term there are a few actions that will help over the coming weeks.
Exactly, Kieran. I think the one thing to take with condition score is the sooner you start, the easier it is to deal with. It takes time to fix it, but the sooner you get on it, the quicker you'll get there.
Frank, good catching up with you. Thanks for that today.
Thanks, Kieran.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. Some useful short-term strategies that can be implemented on farms is highlighted by Frank. Also, the overall impact the condition score can have, and I think it's something we've seen as a challenge over the past couple of years. I have included a link in the show notes where you can get access to Frank's presentation for the National Sheep Conference. It has a lot more detail in it about the effects of condition score and various aspects of the production cycle. And look, it's ongoing work. We'll definitely come back to Frank about at a later stage. That's it for me for this episode. For updates on our sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.